Good evening. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report. Tonight, we're cutting through the carefully crafted narratives coming out of Davos, Switzerland, where nearly 3,000 of the world's wealthiest and most powerful individuals just spent a week discussing global challenges in a luxury mountain resort.
And we're focusing on one particular performance that deserves scrutiny. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto made his World Economic Forum debut this week, pitching his country as a beacon of stability and promising to eliminate corruption. According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, he told the assembled billionaires and corporate executives, "I challenge them to try to buy officials from my administration. They will come to find themselves surprised."
That's a remarkable claim. And on its surface, Indonesia does present an attractive investment proposition. The IMF has described it as a global bright spot with strong economic growth, over 5% annually for the past decade, inflation at around 2%, and a budget deficit kept below 3% of GDP.
But here's what Prabowo didn't mention in his Davos speech, and what the financial press conveniently glossed over. According to Human Rights Watch, this is the same Prabowo Subianto who was discharged from the Indonesian military in 1998 and subsequently banned from entering the United States for allegedly committing human rights abuses.
Let's be specific about what we're talking about. A 2005 investigation by the Indonesian National Human Rights Commission concluded that the abduction of 23 Indonesian pro-democracy activists in 1997 and 98 was ordered by Prabowo when he was the leader of Kopassus, Indonesia's special forces. One activist was killed. 13 still remain missing to this day.
He's also been accused of involvement in the assassination of Nicolau Lobato, Timor-Leste's first prime minister and key pro-independence resistance leader, and implicated in the 1983 Caras massacre of over 300 Timorese civilians. We're not talking about minor allegations here. We're talking about systematic violence against civilians and political opponents.
And yet, there he was at Davos, being treated as a legitimate world leader, promising to stamp out what he called greedonomics while positioning Indonesia as a safe haven for global capital. The cognitive dissonance is staggering.
Now, let's examine the centerpiece of his economic pitch. Prabowo has established something called Danantra, Indonesia's new sovereign wealth fund, designed to consolidate and manage state-owned enterprises. He's promising to streamline 1,044 state companies down to approximately 300, eliminating inefficiency and implementing international governance standards.
On paper, that sounds reasonable. Danantra now controls 7 of Indonesia's largest state-owned enterprises, including Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Bank Negara Indonesia, Telkom Indonesia, Pertamina, Perusahaan Listrik Negara, and Mind ID in mining. According to Asia House Research, these assets total $980 billion.
$980 billion in state assets being consolidated under a new fund that reports directly to the president. And this brings us to the elephant in the room that Prabowo certainly didn't discuss at Davos. Let's talk about Pertamina.
Pertamina is Indonesia's state-owned energy company, and it's at the center of what is being called the largest corruption scandal in Indonesian history. According to the country's Attorney General's office, as reported by multiple sources including the South China Morning Post and Indonesia Business Post, the estimated state losses are 968.5 trillion rupiah. That's approximately $58 billion.
$58 billion. Let me put that in perspective. That's more than the GDP of many countries. That's larger than the annual budget of entire nations. And it was systematically stolen through what prosecutors describe as a coordinated scheme involving crude oil governance fraud.
The Attorney General arrested 9 suspects for allegedly colluding to defraud Pertamina over petroleum imports from 2018 to 2023. 6 of them were Pertamina executives. The scheme involved manipulating refinery production levels to justify crude oil imports at inflated prices, bypassing domestic supply obligations, allegedly conducted in collaboration with private brokers.
According to University of Indonesia's Faculty of Administrative Science Research, the breakdown of state losses tells the story. 35 trillion rupiah from illicit domestic crude oil exports. 2.7 trillion from crude oil imports through brokers. 9 trillion from fuel imports through brokers. 126 trillion in compensation payments. 21 trillion in fuel subsidies.
And here's the part that directly affected ordinary Indonesians. The public was sold low-quality adulterated fuel at premium prices. The fuel was so poor that it caused widespread damage to vehicles. When this became known, consumers began boycotting Pertamina stations and switching to Shell, BP, and Vivo.
So the Indonesian people were paying for their own exploitation. They were buying contaminated fuel that destroyed their vehicles while Pertamina executives and private brokers were pocketing billions. That's the greedonomics that actually exists in Indonesia, and it's the one thing Prabowo didn't want to discuss at Davos.
Now, Prabowo took office in October 2024, and to his credit, investigations into these high-profile corruption cases did launch after his inauguration. The Pertamina CEO even issued a public apology. But 11 months into his presidency, according to Human Rights Watch reporting from January 2026, his government has not addressed the long-standing culture of impunity related to human rights violations in Indonesia.
And this is where we need to connect the dots between corporate power, state corruption, and the charade that is the World Economic Forum. Nearly 3,000 of the world's wealthiest individuals gathered in Davos under the theme, A Spirit of Dialogue, to discuss global challenges. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, one of the forum's co-chairs, actually acknowledged the absurdity, stating, "For many people, this meeting feels out of step with the moment, elites in an age of populism."
At least he's honest about that. But here's what The Wire and PBS News reported about the actual composition and function of Davos. The World Economic Forum's exorbitant membership fees and elite composition create what critics call corporate capture of global governance. These aren't democratic institutions. They're networking events for billionaires to coordinate their interests with compliant governments.
And Prabowo understands exactly what these investors want to hear. He told them, 1,000 friends are too few for us, one enemy too many. He positioned trade integration not as a threat to sovereignty but as a tool for shared prosperity. He promised stability in an unsettled world economy.
But what does stability mean in this context? It means a government willing to consolidate nearly $1 trillion in state assets under centralized control. It means a leader who won't ask uncomfortable questions about where foreign investment capital comes from or where it's going. It means a country where labor is cheap, environmental regulations are flexible, and political dissent is manageable.
According to Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, Indonesia scored 37 out of a possible 100, ranking 99th out of 180 countries. That's the reality behind Prabowo's promises to eliminate corruption. Indonesia has made limited progress in tackling systemic corruption, and investigations into inflated procurement contracts, abuse of power, and political interference have shown that entrenched corruption continues to thrive in key strategic sectors.
So when Prabowo challenges investors to try to buy officials from my administration, we need to understand what he's actually saying. He's not promising to end corruption. He's promising to centralize it, to make it more efficient, to bring it under presidential control through mechanisms like Danantara.
And the investors at Davos loved it. Because that's exactly the kind of stability they want. Not the messy stability of democratic accountability, independent judiciaries, and free press. But the clean stability of deals made at the top, where a handshake with the president is worth more than 1,000 local permits.
Let's talk about who benefits from this arrangement. Danantara's 2026 investment plan, according to reporting from GovMedia and the Indonesian National Police News Service, focuses on telecommunications infrastructure, smart industrial parks, digital public service platforms, green technology, and renewable energy.
Those are all sectors that require massive foreign investment and generate enormous opportunities for public-private partnerships. And public-private partnerships, in countries with weak governance and high corruption, are historically where the looting happens. Private profits, public losses.
We've seen this playbook before in dozens of developing countries. State assets get consolidated under the promise of efficiency. Foreign capital floods in under the promise of stability. The political elite and their corporate partners extract maximum value. And when the house of cards collapses, when the corruption becomes so egregious it can't be hidden anymore, it's ordinary citizens who pay the price.
The Pertamina scandal is the perfect case study. $58 billion in state losses. That's money that could have funded schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Instead, it lined the pockets of executives and brokers. And the Indonesian people got poisoned fuel that destroyed their vehicles.
Now, Danantara is also expected to merge with Indonesia's other sovereign wealth fund, the Indonesia Investment Authority. But there are complications. The INA falls under the Ministry of Finance, while Danantara reports directly to the president. According to Lexology's analysis, aligning these reporting structures presents challenges.
Challenges. That's diplomatic language for a power struggle over who controls nearly $1 trillion in assets. And in a country ranked 99th in the world for corruption, with a president who has a documented history of human rights abuses and a pattern of evading accountability, those challenges should concern anyone who cares about transparency.
But transparency is precisely what wasn't on display at Davos. The official agenda centered on addressing global instability, widening inequality, and the climate crisis. Yet according to Oxfam's analysis, the actual agenda of Davos elites is slashing taxes for the wealthiest, fostering AI-related stocks that help rich investors get richer, and thwarting efforts to tax giant companies.
Oxfam called it a pro-billionaire agenda, and the evidence backs that up. While Davos participants document dangers, they offer polite exchanges over champagne rather than structural reforms like progressive taxation or binding inequality measures. It's theater. Expensive, exclusive theater designed to create the appearance of global leadership while protecting the interests of capital.
And into this theater walks Prabowo Subianto, a man with blood on his hands and corruption at his feet, selling Indonesia as the solution to global instability. The World Economic Forum gave him a platform. The financial press amplified his message. And investors are lining up to cut deals.
This is how modern corporate imperialism works. It doesn't require military occupation anymore. It requires compliant leaders who understand the game. Leaders who can deliver stability, not for their people, but for capital. Leaders who can promise access to resources, cheap labor, and favorable regulations without the inconvenience of democratic accountability.
Prabowo's Davos pitch wasn't about making Indonesia better for Indonesians. It was about making Indonesia safe for foreign extraction. And the fact that he could make that pitch without being challenged on his human rights record, without being questioned about the $58 billion Pertamina scandal, without having to explain why 13 pro-democracy activists are still missing from his military crackdown, that tells you everything you need to know about who the World Economic Forum serves.
Let's be clear about the broader pattern we're seeing. According to the WEF's own 2026 risk assessment, geoeconomic confrontation tops the list at 18% of respondents, followed by state-based armed conflict, extreme weather, polarization, and misinformation. The world is becoming more unstable, more unequal, more dangerous.
And yet the solutions being proposed at Davos involve consolidating more power in fewer hands, giving more control to unaccountable institutions like sovereign wealth funds, and trusting leaders like Prabowo who have proven track records of violence and corruption. How exactly is that supposed to solve anything?
It's not. It's designed to protect capital as the world burns. That's the real agenda. When they talk about stability, they mean stability for investments, not stability for communities. When they talk about efficiency, they mean efficient extraction, not efficient governance. When they talk about international standards, they mean standards that prioritize corporate rights over human rights.
And Indonesia under Prabowo is being positioned as a model for this approach. A resource-rich country with a massive population, strategic location, and a leader who understands that challenging Western power requires not revolution but negotiation. A leader who knows exactly how to package authoritarianism as pragmatism.
His statement at Davos, 1,000 friends are too few for us, one enemy too many, that's the language of someone who has studied how to navigate great power competition. Indonesia isn't aligning with China or the West. It's positioning itself as the dealmaker, the stable alternative, the country where everyone can do business.
And if that requires forgetting about 13 missing pro-democracy activists, if that requires overlooking $58 billion in state losses, if that requires ignoring the hundreds of Timorese civilians massacred in Caras, well, the global elite gathered at Davos have made it clear they're willing to forget.
Because ultimately, the World Economic Forum isn't about solving global problems. It's about managing them in ways that don't threaten existing power structures. Protesters marched up the Alpine Road to Davos behind a banner reading, "No profit from war," and passed a truck with a sign declaring, "World Economic Failure." They understand what's happening better than any panel discussion inside the conference halls.
The legitimacy crisis facing Davos elites is real. As The Wire reported, the very structure of the forum widens the chasm between these Davos men and the world's peoples. And when someone like Larry Fink acknowledges that critique, when he admits the meeting feels out of step with the moment, what he's really saying is, we know you know, and we're doing it anyway.
That's the message Prabowo received, and it's the message he's taking back to Indonesia. You can have a documented history of human rights abuses. You can preside over massive corruption. You can silence dissent and consolidate power. As long as you promise stability for capital, you'll have friends at Davos.
And the $58 billion looted from Pertamina? That's just the cost of doing business. The 13 missing activists? Unfortunate but irrelevant to investment decisions. The 300 civilians killed in Caras? Ancient history that shouldn't interfere with Indonesia's bright future as a destination for foreign capital.
This is what corporate capture of global governance looks like. Not soldiers in the streets but handshakes in luxury resorts. Not explicit colonialism but structural adjustment and public-private partnerships. Not military coups but sovereign wealth funds that consolidate state assets under presidential control.
And the Indonesian people, like people in dozens of other countries following this model, are left with the consequences. Poisoned fuel. Missing activists. Wealth flowing upward to those connected to power. Empty promises of anti-corruption campaigns that somehow never threaten the actual structure of corruption.
Prabowo told Davos that Indonesia removed regulations encouraging red tape and corruption from the budget. But corruption isn't about regulations. It's about power. It's about who controls resources and who benefits from their exploitation. You can't regulate away corruption when the people writing the regulations are the same ones profiting from the system.
That's the fundamental lie at the heart of Prabowo's pitch, and it's the same lie repeated throughout Davos. The idea that you can have ethical capitalism, that you can have accountable authoritarianism, that you can have sustainable extraction. You can't. These are contradictions, and no amount of international standards or governance reform changes that.
What Indonesia needs is genuine democratic accountability, an independent judiciary that can actually prosecute corruption at the highest levels, a free press that can investigate without fear, and justice for the victims of past atrocities. What Indonesia is getting instead is Denantra, a sovereign wealth fund that consolidates power and creates new opportunities for elite looting.
And the template being established in Indonesia will be exported to other countries. That's how these systems work. The World Economic Forum identifies best practices. The IMF and World Bank provide technical assistance. Foreign investors follow the money. And before long, what happened in Indonesia is happening everywhere that capital wants access.
We need to be paying attention to these patterns. Not the carefully stage-managed speeches at Davos, but the actual structures being built, the actual money flowing, the actual people being silenced. That's where the truth lives, in the details that don't make it into the official press releases.
Prabowo Subianto's Davos debut was a success by the metrics that matter to global elites. He secured Indonesia's position as a favored destination for investment. He demonstrated his willingness to play the game. He showed that he understands what stability means in their language.
But for the 13 activists still missing, for the families who lost loved ones in Kraras, for the Indonesians who got poison fuel from Pertamina while $58 billion was stolen, for anyone who believes that human rights and democratic accountability should matter, his speech was a reminder of how far we've fallen.
The World Economic Forum gave a platform to a man credibly accused of ordering kidnappings, assassinations, and massacres. They treated him as a legitimate leader. They amplified his promises without scrutinizing his record. And they did it because his record doesn't matter to them. Only his utility to capital matters.
That's the truth that needs to be reported. Not the fantasy of benevolent billionaires solving global challenges, but the reality of power protecting itself at any cost. Not the promise of stability and growth, but the pattern of extraction and impunity.
Indonesia deserves better than Prabowo. The world deserves better than Davos. And we all deserve better than a global system that elevates war criminals to positions of power as long as they promise favorable terms for investment.
That's our report for tonight. We'll keep following these stories, connecting the dots that the mainstream press leaves scattered. Because someone has to tell the truth about who benefits and who pays.
I'm Maya Clarity.
And I'm Alex Truth. Thanks for watching Truth Report.